In 1819, Missouri submitted its application for statehood, with a constitution that permitted slavery. This touched off a vigorous debate about the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. At the time, there was equal numbers of slaves and free states in the Union, and the addition of Missouri as a slave state would have upset the balance in the Senate, given that the states had a majority. As a solution was reached when Maine, formerly as a part of Massachusetts, entered the Union as a free state, thus preserving an equal number of slave states to free states. The compromise also included a provision to limit the future spread of slavery by using Missouri's southern borders as a line to mark slavery's potential expansion. Others like John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, saw the potential for an issue. Commenting on the compromise, Adam wrote, "I take it for granted that the present question is a mere preamble, a title page to a great tragic volume."
James K. Polk became the 11th President of the United States after winning a close election in 1844. Once in office, Polk added to the nation's western lands by annexing Texas and part of Oregon. Many Americans believed that expansion across the continent was the destiny of the United States. Others worried that the bold acquisitions of land would lead to war. The actions of James K. Polk during his presidency did both. He added territory to the United States and fought a war with Mexico over expansion. The manifest destiny was a phrase coined to describe the belief that America was to expand and settle the entire continent of North America. The phrase originated in 1845 when John L. O'Sullivan, a newspaper editor, wrote that it was America's destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions.
The phrase itself was used more by critics than supporters as a way to ridicule expansionism. Whigs and others opposed it. A lot of Northerners thought it was code for spreading slavery. In fact, a lot of manifest destiny advocates, people who believed in territorial expansion, they felt like they had failed. They didn't think the country was spreading widely enough. They wanted all of Mexico. They wanted Canada. They wanted the entire continent to be part of the American Republic. The phrase actually kind of disappeared from American political life until the 1890s, when it was reborn as part of the drive to make the United States a global power.
The Democratic victory in 1844 was thought to be a signal from the public that annexation of Texas was the desire of the people. Texas was annexed, and when Polk took office, it was up to him to deal with Mexico's reaction to the American claim to land that they viewed as their own. Polk also faced a decision about how to fulfill the campaign promise of acquiring Oregon that was also claimed by Great Britain. Since 1818, Great Britain and the United States had essentially shared claim to Oregon. It was likely that Polk would have to fight Mexico to resolve the southern border dispute in Texas, and also fight Great Britain to secure claim to the Oregon Territory. Fighting Great Britain for a third time was the least appealing option. Mexico had recently won its independence from Spain in 1821 after hundreds of years of occupation. Given Mexico's new status and uncertain leadership,
in many ways, the Mexican War, which lasted between 1846 and 1848, can be seen as the final realization and the culmination of manifest destiny. This is basically the idea that the United States was destined by Providence to extend its culture and people from coast to coast. The aftermath of the Mexican War, and especially the issues of the expansion of slavery into lands gained from Mexico, would be a primary reason leading to the Civil War.
Fill her up, please.
What'll it be, fellas? Mustard or ketchup?
Are they laughing at us?
No, Patrick. They're laughing next to us.
Where are you two dumb kids headed anyway?
Kids?
Now, Patrick, for your information, we are not kids, we are men. And we're off to get King Neptune's crown in Shell City.
Shell City? Ain't that the place that's guarded by a killer Cyclops?
That's right.
Floyd, take off your hat in respect. Respect for the dead! You two dipsticks ain't gonna last 10 seconds over the county line.
Oh, yeah? We'll see about that. Yeah.
Out of the car, fellas.
The Compromise of 1850 was 4 years in the making. Northern Whigs and Southern Democrats engaged in heated attacks on one another over the status of slavery in Mexican secession. Then, the discovery of gold in California in 1848 rapidly increased the population of the territory past the 100,000 citizens necessary for statehood. As a part of their plan of statehood, Californians drew up a state constitution that outlawed slavery in the proposed state.
In January of 1850, a senator named Henry Clay, who's famous as a compromiser in American history, he offered a package of proposals to try to adjust the sectional debate between the country over this issue. And the debate in the Senate was fierce and intense, some of the most dramatic scenes in American history. And they turned over the architecture, the engineering of this compromise package to Stephen Douglas, a younger senator from Illinois, a Democrat. And Douglas decided that the only way to get enough support for all of the different elements of the compromise was to break it apart and treat it separately. When it achieved final form as a series of separate bills in the fall of 1860, there were only 5 bills. One was about the admission of California as a state, a free state. One was about the organization of the Southwest Territories, New Mexico and Utah, without regard to slavery. One was about the adjustment of the border with Texas and New Mexico. One was about the elimination of the slave trade in the District of Columbia. And the 5th and final bill, and most important for Southerners, a tougher federal fugitive slave law.
In 1854, Congress again took up the issue of slavery in proposed states and territories. Stephen A. Douglas included a provision using popular sovereignty, which would allow the citizens of the territory to decide whether or not slavery would be allowed. Southerners hoped that by allowing the people to decide the issue that more slave states would be added. After a great deal of rancorous debate in both houses, the bill was approved and became known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act had several effects. First, the law virtually repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850. Settlers in all new territories would have the right to decide for themselves whether their new home would be a free or slave state. The second effect that the Kansas-Nebraska Act had was the pro- and anti-slavery groups both hurried into Kansas in an attempt to create voting majorities there. Anti-slavery abolitionists came from eastern states. Pro-slavery settlers came mainly from neighboring Missouri. Pro-slavery voters elected a legislature ready to make Kansas a slave state. Abolitionists then elected a rival Kansas government, wrote an anti-slavery constitution, established a different capital city, and raised an army. Pro-slavery Kansans reacted by raising their own army. Violence between the two sides created warlike conditions that led to the territory being referred to as Bleeding Kansas. Popular sovereignty had failed.
The primary issue once again revolved around the expansion of slavery. Increasingly, Southerners saw any limits on slavery into the territories as an attack on the institution of slavery itself, which to the Southerners was the way of life. By the same token, Northerners increasingly viewed slave as a stain of immortality on the national fabric that needed to be controlled because it was erratically inhumane. One very important event that historians often attribute as a milestone on the road to war was the publication of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852.